Alright, good day everyone. Welcome to the first of the video lectures for Intermediate Greek 1. For this lecture I wanted to go over a review of the material from the first year that you will need to know as we start in on our translations. This will just be a really quick overview. You may need to go over the textbook kind of on your own and refresh your memory on some of this stuff, but for the purpose of just doing a really quick review of stuff that I think is very critical for you to know, we'll start off on that, and then I've got a discussion of the first chapter of the textbook, which I'm actually not expecting you to have yet, but I wanted to cover some of that material to just get you introduced to what we are going to be doing with Greek cases and how we're going to get deeper into the usage of this. We'll be looking at the nominative case, which on the surface should be really simple, but there's actually a lot more to it that we'll be looking at. So let's get started with this. With the review of the first year of Greek. Okay. We have, of course, in Greek a 5-case system and a review of what those do. I think all of you know this, but nominative is usually your subject. And again, we'll be looking more into that and expanding on that a lot this week. Genitive is possession or separation. The dative is often used as the indirect object, and the accusative is the direct object. Alright, then you have the 5th case, which does not appear a lot. This is a vocative, which is the direct address. And so those are the basic uses of the 4 cases, with a vocative being kind of tacked on there. We will be covering these, of course, in greater detail. So we'll be adding to genitive. What does this mean? Not just separation or possession, but it means a lot of other things. A dative means a lot more than the indirect object. And we'll be looking at the nominative case in that way in a little bit. But going on from the cases, nouns, what else? Pronouns, adjectives, they have declension patterns. And the first declension is actually the second declension pattern that we covered. If you remember, this was covered in Chapter 5 of the first year textbook, and the second declension was covered in Chapter 4. So we learned the second declension first. But here is the first declension. Now, if you remember, the first declension is mostly feminine nouns. And the way that the first declension works, what makes it a little bit more complicated than the second declension, is that it depends on what the noun stem ends in. There are a number of variations only in the singular forms, depending on what that last letter of the noun stem is. So if your noun stem ends in epsilon, iota, or rho, you have the far left column there. Actually, not the far left column. Far left has your 4 cases. And then the next column over from that is epsilon, iota, or rho. Notice hemera ends in a rho, and so it falls into this category, and you have alphas going throughout the pattern. So hemera, hemeras, hemera with the iota subscript, and hemeran. Now if your stem ends in a sigma sound, now you have alphas in the nominative and accusative, and etas in the genitive and the dative, as you have here with doxa. So this one changes the vowel doxa, then doxase with an eta, doxa with the iota subscript, and doxon. If the stem ends in any other letter, as psuke does, that is not an epsilon, iota, or rho, it is not a sigma or a sigma sound. You have psuke, and this is going to be like hemera, but wherever you had alphas in the first pattern, you're having etas here. So psuke, psukase, psuke, psukein. Then in the plural forms, you do not have this variation with the noun stems. Any noun stem, any gender, even the few masculine words that are first declension, the plurals all look like this. Okay, all of the plurals, they end in I, then own, ice for the dative, and os for the accusative. All right, so that is a quick review of the first declension and how it works. Other types of words that take a declension pattern, such as an adjective, they work the same way. Okay, if you have an adjective that ends in epsilon, iota, or rho, the feminine forms of that adjective are going to correspond to the first column here, the epsilon, iota, or rho. Okay, so even in an adjective, you would have in the singular form all alphas. If you had any other letter, there would be all etas in that singular form. And then again, first declension, all of the plural forms, the endings are the same. All right, if you need to look at that, that is in Chapter 5 of the first year textbook. I hope you held on to that. We'll be referring back to that for a bit here. Now going on from the first declension, we have the second declension. Then most of these are masculine. You have a few feminine forms, and for those feminine forms, they will look identical to the masculine. Okay, and then you have the subset of the second declension, which is the neuters. So let's look at the masculine, and actually this is masculine or feminine. I could have put that on. But here you have the word logos. That happens to be a masculine word. And so this is the singular, logos, then genitive, logu, dative, logo, again, iota subscript in that dative singular, and logon, accusative. Plurals, logoi, logon, logois, logus. Again, if you have a feminine word like hadas, the endings here are going to be identical. There is no difference between masculine or feminine in the second declension, unlike the first declension where there was a slight distinction between the masculine and the feminine. Okay, in the neuters, this is a subset of the second declension again. As in all neuters, across all of the declension patterns, even the adjective forms and such, the nominative and the accusative forms are going to be the same. That's the characteristic of the neuter. And then the genitive and dative forms will look identical to the masculine. So notice here, doron, nominative, and doron also appears in the accusative there. And then the genitive and dative, doru, doro, the endings are the same as the masculine. In the plurals, same thing. Okay, dora is the nominative, so dora is the accusative as well. And then doron and dorois, genitive and dative. Now, moving on to the third declension. This one is the one that's very complicated, and this one has masculine, feminine, and neuter all kind of mixed together. As I said here, there's lots of different patterns. I think we learned 6 patterns in the first year, but this one is kind of a good one to start off with. This one will also be the pattern for your participle endings, at least the present active participle. So you have here archon, which means the ruler. And then notice here the stem change between the nominative and the genitive. Nominative is archon and genitive is archontos. That stem change is very important for the third declension because after the genitive singular, all of the subsequent forms are going to follow the genitive singular stem, not the nominative singular. So you'll see genitive archontos, then the dative is built off of the genitive, archonti, and then archonta, the accusative. These are totally different endings, a completely different pattern from the first or second declension. So if you need to refer to this one, this was in chapter 17. Chapter 18 also has some third declension endings as well. The plurals, now all based on the genitive singular stem. Archontes, archonton. The dative plural is always weird. It has this sigma, iota, and movable new ending. Okay, archusi or archusine. And then archontos, accusative plural. All right, once again, the stem change between the nominative and genitive singular, and the entire declension pattern is based off of the genitive singular. Now, when we discuss verbs, moving on from substantives, nouns, adjectives, those sorts of things, now we're going to verbs. Verbs have a number of different categories that you need to think of when we're talking about interpretation, but one of them is tense. One of the most important ones is tense, and this goes across all verbs, whether you're dealing with infinitives or participles or whatever, they have tense. In Greek, you have verb tense, and normally in English, tense is talking about time, whether an action happened in the past, present, future. In Greek, tense is just as important, referring to the kind of action or aspect. Okay? Is this an action that is happening repeatedly over a period of time, kind of like a video recording, a parade in progress? Or is this talking about a point in time, kind of a snapshot of an action? So you have the present and imperfect tense. Normally this indicates something that happened repeatedly or over a period of time continuously. The aorist tense is the opposite of that. The aorist tense is your snapshot. Just a point in time, and we're not dealing at all with time passing or any kind of continuity. Now the perfect tense is a special case, and anytime you have a perfect tense, take note of this. The perfect tense will usually mean that an action has been completed, so it is not happening in the present, but that perfect tense action still has effects into the present. There are echoes or lingering results that are significant, and the writer or speaker is drawing attention to that. Always pay attention to this whenever you have a perfect tense anything, whether it's a main verb or a participle or anything that is perfect tense. Because why is the author wanting to emphasize this? Okay, why are they emphasizing that this is done, it happened and it's done, but this is still being felt in the now? And normally, the emphasis will be on those effects in the present. Something is lingering around, and the author wants you to know that. Then the future tense kind of takes on both of these aspects. Okay, the continuous or the point kind of snapshot thing. Okay, and it largely depends on the context. Am I saying I will be walking tomorrow, emphasizing the process, or is it just I will walk tomorrow, emphasizing the point? Okay, the future takes on both of those. The present also takes on both of those as well. All right. Now, here I have said be familiar with your verb tenses, and here are some of the major ones. I've left out some of them, but we'll probably go on and review those as they come up. But as far as like present, future, aorist, those are some pretty important ones and pretty foundational in first year Greek. So here we have the present active indicative. This is the most basic form that you learn. This is way back in chapter 3 of the first year. The verb chart has 6 forms here: first, second, third person, and each of those has a singular and plural. And they correspond to the various pronouns: I, you, he, she, or it. Plurals: we, you, and they. All right, so when we're talking about forms, your friendly, basic, very easy form chart, right? Luo, lues, lue, luamen, lueta, luusen. I don't know if I did this with this class, but yeah, sometimes I will sing a song. I'll teach you a song about that. Luo, lues, lue, luamen, lueta, luusen. Luo, lues, lue, luamen, lueta, luusen. Okay, there you go. That's probably the only time that you'll ever hear me sing in this class. But yeah, your 6 forms, they're I loose, you loose, he, she, or it looses, we loose, you loose, and they loose. Okay, the basic kind of form chart that all verb form charts are based off of. And then each of these tenses is going to be a variation on those basic forms. All right, future active indicative, of course, you're going to put a sigma after the end of the stem and then use the same endings that you did for the present. So the only variation is that there's a sigma now. Luso, luces, luce, lusamen, luceta, lususen. Something that I didn't put on this slide and that you'll want to be aware of if you remember, sometimes that sigma combines with other letters to make a totally different letter and a different stem. Okay, an example would be the verb grapho, I write, which has its stem end in a phi, but the phi combines with the sigma to make a psi. And so that turns into gropso. All right, just a variation on the form. It's the same idea as just adding a sigma, but some of these letters, they combine with the sigma sound to very conveniently reflect other letters. Kappa plus a sigma sounds like a xi, right? And then some letters even drop out because I guess a theta or a tau plus a sigma doesn't sound really great, and so yeah, you just end up with a sigma. But yeah, that's the future and some of the issues that happen when you put the sigma at the end of the stem. Let's move on to the aorist now. The first aorist is a combination of the past tense epsilon that you put on the beginning of the stem and then the sigma that you add to the future. Okay, so you're going to have something at the beginning of the stem and something at the end. Here, going off of the very regular verb luo, you have elusa, elusas, elusen. The aorist is translated as a simple past tense. Again, this is just like taking a snapshot of something, just a moment in time. Elusa, I loosed. Then you loosed, he, she, or it loosed. Your plurals, elusamen, we loosed, elusate, you loosed, elusan, they loosed. So I should mention also, just like the future, sometimes you will have the amalgamation is what they call it, when the sigma sound at the end of the stem combines with a letter on the end of the stem. The example that I gave, the verb grapho, turns into agropsa in the aorist with a psi right before the alpha ending. Right, so you're combining both of those things, the augment, epsilon augment at the beginning and the sigma at the end. That is the first aorist. Now the second aorist, also called the strong aorist in some grammars call it first and second aorist, others call them strong and weak aorist. Okay. This is the second or strong aorist, and a characteristic of the second aorist is that you are going to have a stem change. Most of the time, the stem change is pretty recognizable. Okay, here we are taking the verb lambano, and the aorist stem simply is a shortened version of the present stem. Lamban in the present shortens to lab in the aorist. And with this one, you're going to have the augment, the epsilon augment at the beginning, just like the first aorist. But unlike the first aorist, there is no sigma that is added to the end of the stem. And then these endings are actually the endings of the imperfect tense, which I haven't covered here. Okay, but yeah, the imperfect we covered in chapter 7 of last year's textbook. And the endings then look like this: elaban, I took; elabes, you took; elaben, she, he, or it took. Something to Something to notice about this one, the first person singular and the third person plural are the same. So going to the plurals, elabamen, we took, elabete, you took, and then again, third person plural reverts back to the first person singular ending elaban, they took. Kind of nice for memorizing forms, but something of a bother at times when you're going to translate. Does this singular form mean, I took, or does it mean plural they took? Yeah. All right, so yeah, that's the second aorist. No sigma, and then instead of the alphas of the first aorist in the endings, this one has omicrons and epsilons in the endings. All right, the other thing to keep in mind is that, yeah, some of these stem changes are pretty recognizable. Most of them actually are. They're maybe shortened forms, or just sometimes they even just drop out a letter. But some of them are really, really major changes. The verb lego, I speak or I say, takes an aorist form that looks completely different. It is apon. And so, yeah, that's a completely different stem. We think that it probably came from a completely different verb that they just took and they squished these two verbs together and they said, okay, now you in the present tense are going to be associated with the you, the completely different verb in the aorist tense. Why they would do that, I don't know, but that's just what they did. And we actually do it in English too, so we can't complain too much. Go in English has a past tense of went, and that doesn't make any sense either. So, yeah, something that all language students have to deal with. Okay. Another thing to keep in mind is that there are some slight variations on this as well. If you have a verb that begins with a vowel, it will not have an epsilon stuck to the front of it normally. Normally what happens is that epsilon augment gets kind of blended into the vowel that begins the stem, and the vowel just shifts from a short vowel to a long vowel. Okay, if you have a word that begins with an epsilon, when you turn it into an aorist, that epsilon will turn into an eta. And alpha does the same thing. Alpha, if a verb begins with an alpha, that alpha will turn into an eta. Omicron will turn into omega. What happens when a verb begins with a vowel that is not one of those three, alpha, epsilon, or omicron? Then, yeah, some really wild things happen, and it's better to take them case by case than thinking of them as a pattern. Okay, so that's dealing with the aorist, first and second aorist. There are other tenses, imperfect tense, perfect tense, pluperfect tense, but yeah, we won't cover those because this video is going to get long anyway. So in the interest of time and not making you sit through too much of me talking, I will cut those and we'll deal with them as they come up. Okay. Next part of verbs that you'll need to know is voice, and we will be delving into this probably at the beginning of second quarter. Okay, we'll really be talking about voice, but a general overview of voice is that the active, the subject performs the action of the verb. Okay, and so you have here the present active indicative. Again, these basic forms that we went over before, luo, lues, lue, luamen, lueta, luusen. Okay. And that is the subject is performing the action of the verb. And yeah, you have I loose, okay? I am the one who is doing the loosing. You loose, you are the one who is doing the loosing, etc. Okay. All right, that's the active voice. Now let's deal with the middle voice. This one does not have any corresponding forms or meanings in English. Okay, there is no middle voice in English, and so translating the Greek middle voice is a bit awkward. Middle voice has the idea that the subject is acting on itself, like the action comes back on the subject, or it's acting on behalf of itself. It can also have the meaning, I didn't put it up here because it was getting really long, but the middle also has meaning of we're going to emphasize the subject. And so there's lots of different ways to translate a middle, and none of them are particularly elegant when you put them into English. But the middle voice, like all verbal forms, is going to have its own set of endings. And so when we change from the present active to the present middle, we need to learn a different set of endings. And yeah, you're going to have the same thing happen. Present has middle forms, aorist has middle forms, future has middle forms. And so, yeah, you get a lot of different variations here. Going quickly over the middle voice, though. So, singular forms, luamai, first person singular, I loose myself. And lu-a with the iota subscript, you loose yourself. Lu-etai, he, she, or it looses him, her, or itself. Lu-amitha, we loose ourselves. Lu-estha, you loose yourselves. Lu-antai, they loose themselves. Something that's kind of nice in some ways, at least in a few of the tenses. Okay? The passive voice is a totally different voice in the middle, but the forms of the middle and passive are identical. Okay? The passive voice meaning is the opposite of the active. Instead of the subject is doing the acting of the verb, the subject is being acted upon by another party, but sometimes that party is not stated. All right, you do not have to say who is doing this action now, but all we know is that an action is happening, and it is happening to the subject. As I said before, these forms are identical to the middle forms, at least in the present. So we have luamai. It can mean I loose myself, or here in the passive, I am loosed. All right, someone or something is doing the loosing, but I am the one who is being loosed. Lue, with the iota subscript, you are loosed. Luetai, he, she, or it is loosed. Luamitha, we are loosed. Luestha, you are loosed. You plural, y'all are loosed. Luantai, they are loosed. And I've put on a note down here on the bottom. Those tenses, okay, the present and the perfect tenses, your middle and passive forms are the same. All right, your aorist and future are going to have different endings. Okay, for the middle and passive forms are going to be separated. But in the present and the perfect, it's kind of nice. The middle and passive forms are the same. Again, this is nice for memorization. You only have to memorize one set of forms. It is a bother for translation because you come to one form, it could be middle or passive, and you have to try both of them. That takes care of voice, and again, we'll be speaking a lot more about that as we get to the second quarter, I believe. Now, I've put here some notes on adjectives and participles, and they're actually quite different, but they are used in basically the same way. Adjectives are descriptive words, and then the participles are going to be your, quote, verbal adjectives. Okay. But they're used in similar fashions. So adjective and participles I've put here, they take all of the forms, so be careful with these. They've got a lot of forms, and hopefully you haven't forgotten all of them over the course of the summer. But they will take gender, number, and case, and so they have variations in form for all of those. If an adjective or a participle is directly associated with, okay, it's modifying your noun, it will agree with that noun in gender, number, and case, which is why they have to have all those forms, because they have to be able to attach onto any noun. Okay, and they can attach to any noun, any gender, any declension pattern, okay? And that sometimes brings up problems. noted here. There are some times when you will have an adjective that is attached to a noun or a pronoun or something else, and the endings will not correspond. Okay, and so at first glance it doesn't look like they're related. Here's an example: tais, kalais, hadus. Okay, the beautiful roads. Hadus just happens to be one of these annoying cases where you have a second declension noun, but it is feminine. Okay, most of your second declension nouns are masculine, but here hadas is a word that is a feminine second declension noun. It is identical to masculine forms, but you just kind of have to know that it's feminine, and therefore both the definite article tais and the adjective kalais are going to be feminine. Okay, so yeah, just be careful with that one. And I am actually noticing here that, yeah, I wasn't careful enough, and I actually mixed up my cases. So you have tais kalais, which is dative, and hadus, which is accusative. Okay, so don't do what I just did. And I just noticed that on this slide. But yeah, the point is, my mistake notwithstanding, that yeah, sometimes you can have these endings that will switch, and yeah, the declension pattern does not exactly match up with its gender. So be careful of those. Okay. Using these adjectives and participles, there are three basic categories which these fall into, and you'll probably remember these because we went over these a number of times. But you have an attributive usage and what we call the attributive position, where the adjective is sandwiched in between its related article and noun. You have the article-noun grouping, the whatever, the person, the day, the rock, okay, and then you have an adjective which will be stuffed right in the middle between those two. Okay, look at the first example here, tes esca tes hemeras. All right, tes hemeras is the article-noun combination, the day. In this case, it's genitive, so of the day. And then you have the adjective esca tes in there, the last day, of the last day. Okay. Then the second example here, tous lithus, tous micrus, this is also an attributive position. Notice that the adjective is outside of that grouping. However, you have the identical article that is stated again, tous lithus, tous micrus. That second tous kind of pulls the micrus into that article-noun grouping and therefore makes it attributive. All right, the small stones. All right, so even though those two are very different in appearance, okay, one has the adjective smushed in the middle, the other one has the adjective outside. With that second article, you have, again, an attributive position adjective. So, yeah, both in the same kind of translation. You just translate this as an adjective that is modifying a noun, telling you about the noun, giving you a characteristic. The second example here, the predicate adjective. This one, the adjective is outside of that article-noun grouping. It doesn't matter whether the adjective is outside of it at the end, okay, after the article-noun, or in front of the article-noun. As long as they're all related, they have the same gender, number, case, this is a predicate adjective. All right, and the way that you translate this, you have to supply a form of to be that agrees with the subject. So if the subject is singular, the to be form is going to be singular. If it's plural, it can be plural. Depending on the context, the to be verb can be present, it can be past, it can be future. All right, but here are two examples. Ha lithos, the stone, and then there's your article-noun grouping. Then mikros is standing outside of that. Notice it agrees in gender, number, and case, And so therefore you have the stone supply a form of to be. The form of to be that agrees with stone is. The stone is, and then small. The predicate adjective will always make a complete sentence. Therefore, yeah, I've put a period there. The stone is small. And the second example is the adjective before the article noun grouping. He mater, the mother, and then Sophie is wise. That's your adjective. Okay, and again, the mother, supply a form of to be. The mother is, or was, or will be. Okay, it doesn't matter which one of those. Context will tell you. But the mother is wise. The last category here is probably the simplest one. Here the adjective will just appear with an article, but there will be no corresponding noun. Okay, no noun that is agreeing with this in gender, number, and case. And so here you have he Sophie. It's just an article with an adjective. There's no noun with it. And so you can say the wise woman. Why can we say woman? Because you notice the article and the adjective. It is a feminine singular. Therefore, you can say woman. If this is masculine singular, the wise man. If it's anything plural, the wise ones. Okay. So yeah, that's the substantive. You supply the noun when the noun is not there, and you can get which noun it is out of the gender and number of the adjective and article. Moving on now, the last thing that I wanted to review were the pronouns. And the personal pronouns, these ones always trip people up. The forms are really unusual. There's not a really good pattern. You just kind of have to memorize these patterns. Okay, your first person personal pronouns are there. Ego is I. Then the genitive form of I is of me, and that's emu. And the epsilon in parentheses means sometimes you'll see it with the epsilon and sometimes you won't. Okay, it doesn't need the epsilon on there, but a lot of times you do see that. Okay, emu or just mu, of me. Then the dative emoi, to me. Accusative emme, me. And this one's really nice when it doesn't have the epsilon in the beginning. Just mu epsilon, and that looks exactly like me. So that one's nice. Hope everyone gets that one if we go over a translation. Now your plurals, hemes, we, hemon, of us or our, hemin, to us, and then hemas, us. Alright, that's your first person personal pronouns, I or we, and then the different cases. This is one of the few times that English actually has case forms. Okay, that, yeah, you know, if it's a noun, I mean, if it's a subject, you have to say I. If it's an object, you have to say me. Moving on to the second person personal pronouns here. Sue is you. Sue, pronounced exactly the same way, but spelled slightly differently. Of you, and dative soy, and accusative se. Then the plurals humes, like the first person pronoun is hemes, this second person is humes. You, humon, of you, then humin, to you, and humas, you. The first and second person do not have gender. Those forms apply to all genders. But the third person now has gender. He, she, or it. And so have a look at these. But fortunately, the forms are pretty simple. They're pretty much the second and first declension forms that we already went over. So autos, he, autou, of him, auto, to him, and auton, him. And then they, of them, to them, and them, the plurals. Autoi, auton, autois, autus. Going on to the feminine, this follows now the first declension forms, and as before, you look at the last letter of the stem. In this case, it's tau, aute. And so you're going to have in the singular etas going all the way through. Aute, autes, aute, autein. She and her. Then the plurals, those familiar first declension endings that never change. Autai, auton, autais, autas. Okay, they. And now for the neuters. Like all neuters, nominative and accusative forms are the same. Genitive and dative look like the masculine. So auta is both the nominative and accusative. Autu and auto are the genitive and dative. Then in the plurals, auta with an alpha, nominative and accusative. Auton and autois, the genitive and dative. And it looks like I forgot to change the English. Yeah, that should not be she, that's a neuter, so it's it. Of it, to it, and it. And then the plurals, they. Okay, and them. Alright, now that is the review. So have a look at those if you need to go back to your textbook first year textbook, okay? But now let's move on to some new material. This is the deep dive on the nominative case. Typically, as I put here, the nominative case is thought of as a subject. Okay, and what does it mean when it's a subject? Okay, most of the time you will have a noun or some other related word, noun, pronoun, or adjective. It will function as the subject of your main verb. Now, the easiest way of thinking about this is that the subject is the thing that's performing the action. But as we talked about with verb voice, that is not always the case. Okay, it's in the active voice that the subject is performing the action of the verb. Example, I am taking the class. I am the one who's doing the taking. But then you have these variations, okay? In the middle, the subject is performing the action, but it's performing the action on itself. Okay, I am taking myself to my class, or I myself am taking the class. And then here, in the passive, the subject is definitely not performing the action. Okay, the subject is acted upon. The dog is taken on a walk every day. Okay, the dog is not the one who's doing the taking. Although I guess if you had a big enough dog, or energetic enough dog, the dog might be the one taking you. But yeah, the dog is taken on a walk every day. Somebody else is doing the taking. Okay, the dog is receiving the action. So again, here's an example of the subject is not always the one who is doing the action. If it's a passive voice verb, the subject is being acted upon. Also, when we're talking about subject, there are some complications of thinking that, even in an active voice verb, it's not quite as simple to say that the subject is always the one that is doing the action. Okay, that is generally true with an active voice verb, but I've put here a couple of examples where it gets a little bit blurry. Okay, the example, I heard the speech. I is the subject, and I is doing the hearing, but when you're talking about the speech, I am not the one who is performing or giving the speech. Okay, the actual action concept in this sentence, okay, that is related to both I and the speech, I am not the one who is actually performing that speech, right? So yeah, if you analyze this too much and you start thinking about, what is the actual action that is happening here, then it gets a little bit more complicated. This one here is a really good example. I received the gift. Okay, receive is a weird idea. Okay, it's like receiving. It's kind of the opposite of giving, or And so, if you're thinking about who's doing the giving, well, I'm not doing the giving. I'm receiving. Okay, so yeah, sometimes that distinction, or saying that the subject is always the one who's performing the action, not exactly the case. Okay, it depends largely on the type of verb. Both of these verbs, hearing and receiving, they're kind of just the meaning of those verbs, right? Is kind of passive. Okay, whoever's doing the hearing is hearing some other sound that is being generated. Receiving means that you're receiving a gift that is, or something that's being given. So yeah, as we're starting to make these deeper connections in the text, start to notice those kind of shades of meaning and really how they relate to how are we going to interpret this text in front of us. Okay? Who is really performing the action here? Especially when we're talking about things like what God is doing and what Jesus is doing, and we're talking about big things about salvation and such. I'm working out my salvation. Well, really, is it me who's doing that? Do I have any agency in gaining my own salvation? If you're thinking about Christian theology, certainly, humans don't really have any agency to effect our own salvation. It's all coming from God, and so even if I say something like, I am doing this, I'm working out salvation, what's that really saying? Okay. Now here, important thing, not all sentences are going to have subjects in the nominative. Okay, nominative is usually the subject of the verb when you have one, but not all sentences are going to have nominatives in them. Verbs in Greek can have the subject included. Okay, lambano is the first person singular form, and so if you don't have anything else in the sentence, that itself means I take or I receive. Okay, so in this sentence, lambano ta dora, there's nothing in Greek that says I. Okay, there's no separate word that says I. It's included in lambano. Okay, I receive the gifts. Now here are some examples of subject nominatives. Okay, God loved the world, John 3:16. You have egerthe Christos ek nekron, Christ was raised from the dead. Here's a good example of a subject in a passive voice sentence. Okay, egerthe is passive, and that's a good dead giveaway that you're dealing with a passive here, that theta eta. But here, Christ was raised from the dead. Christ is not doing the raising. And then the last one, piste Abraham hupekusen. By faith, Abraham obeyed. Abraham is the one who is doing the obeying. Okay, so simple stuff, right? Nominative is the subject. Nominative is the one that's doing the action or is the subject of the action. All right, the other major use of the nominative, these two, okay, nominative as subject and nominative as what we call the predicate nominative, are by far the most common, okay? Probably 90% of the uses in the New Testament, maybe more than that, like 95 or 97% of the uses are going to be either a subject or a predicate nominative. The predicate nominative is what happens when you have what's called an equative verb. These are verbs that are not necessarily action verbs, but they're kind of those states of being verbs. I am, I happen to be, I become, I come into being. Okay, these are not really actions, but they're just describing states. And so a lot of times in here you'll have a subject and what's called a predicate nominative, and both of those are going to appear in the nominative. Now, they appear with equative verbs, and so a really simplistic way of thinking about this is that there's an equal sign between the two of them, but that doesn't always that's not always the case. Okay, the subject and the predicate nominative are usually close to the same, but they're not always identical. All right, here's an example of them basically being identical. Okay, Jesus is the Son of God. In Christian theology, again, not everybody holds to this, but in Christian thought and belief, Jesus and the Son of God are the exact same person, and so you can say Jesus is the Son of God, or you can say the Son of God is Jesus. Okay, and in that case, it doesn't matter which one is the subject or which one is the predicate nominative, because they're both the same idea and they're both referring to the same person. But again, this is referring to Christian theology. There are other theologies or ways of thinking about the world that might say this is totally fine. But in Christian theology, God is love. That is true. The Bible comes right out and says it in 1 John chapter 4. God is love. But that is not exactly the same thing, at least to Christians, as saying love is God. Okay, you can think of like love as being a category or a description, and God is love is like a description of God, but that is not the same to say as love is God. Okay, you have a number of examples of people believing that and ending up in tragedy and tears. I'm thinking of maybe the Shakespearean drama Romeo and Juliet, right? You have these two people who are madly in love, and they're pretty much like, love is everything to me. Love is God, pretty much. Love is the most important thing in my life. Love is the ultimate expression of my life and my goals. And what happens when that gets broken or something goes wrong, then you have people taking poison and stabbing themselves, and we don't want that to happen. So God is love is a good thing to say. Love is God can lead to bad things. Okay, in English, the subject is always first in the sentence. Okay, that's how you know which one is a subject and which one is a predicate nominative. Okay, I am a man. That in that sentence, I is always going to be the subject because it comes first. It comes before the verb, so therefore that's subject. Not necessarily the case in Greek. Greek word order is much more flexible than English. Here, in this sentence from John chapter 1, you have the word was God, but in Greek, it just reads God was the word. But as we will see, there are some ways to tell which one is a subject and which one is a predicate nominative. In this case, it's pretty clear in the Greek, the word was God. That's how it should be read. Okay, but the word order is slightly mixed up because we are wanting to emphasize the word God. That's why God is first in the Greek. Okay. So Greek word order, much more fluid and much more flexible, and you can jumble words up and you can put them in all kinds of orders depending on which word you want to emphasize. Typically the word that you want to emphasize will come first. Sometimes also it will come last if it's kind of an unusual thing to put the word last. Okay, but here it's pretty clear the author wants to emphasize God. Okay, the word was underline, double underline, highlight. Okay, the word was God in big, huge letters. All right. Now, when we're thinking about predicate nominatives, it gets kind of complicated. We need to think of two types of this, and it's going to use these really fancy words. A subset proposition. Okay, what's this? What on earth does that mean? Okay, it means that in this sentence we have a subject, and the subject is a subset. Therefore, subset proposition. Okay, the subject is a subset, or it's a single example of a larger group. Okay, for example, the sentence John is a man, and I've put a very crude drawing here. When you get your textbooks, you'll see this drawing in there. I pretty much just replicated it. Maybe YouTube will zap this video for being, copyright or whatever. But John is a man. This is an example of a subset proposition. What this means is there's this big group of objects or things, which is man, okay, or men, plural. And John is one of those. Okay, John is an example of the larger group men. With the subset proposition, you cannot switch these around. Okay, this is not an equal sign. When you see the word is, that's not an equal sign. John is a man is not the same thing as saying a man is John. Okay, you can't just take a group of men and just pluck one of those men out of that group and say this man is John. Okay, every one of these men is John. no, John is a single example of the bigger group, but it does not mean that the bigger group is the exact same thing as that example. All right, the second type is a convertible proposition, and this one means that the subject is identical to the predicate nominative. In other words, this is an equal sign. Okay, from the example before, Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus is identical to the Son of God. And so you can say Jesus is the Son of God, or you can just as correctly say the Son of God is Jesus. That is the convertible proposition. Convertible just means, yeah, you can switch them around. Subset proposition means, yeah, you cannot switch these around and still carry the same meaning. Now, how do we tell? How do we tell which one is the subject and which one is the predicate nominative? They both appear in the nominative, okay? And, sometimes it is politically or religiously advantageous to translate it one way or the other, okay? So how do you tell which one is which? If you have two distinct nominative case words in a sentence, in other words, these two nominatives are not referring to the exact same thing, how do we tell which one is which? Okay. All right, so to distinguish the subject, there are a number of rules, okay? First of all, the subject will be a pronoun. And the pronoun can either be stated, some of those personal pronouns that we went over in the review, ego, or su, or he mace, or humas, or any one of those. Okay, you can have a pronoun. Of course, this is going to be in the nominative, so it will be autos, or humace, or ego. Or it could be implied in the verb. Like I said, the verb can have the pronoun kind of in it, right? Luo means I loose. So yeah, the subject will either be that pronoun that's stated or the pronoun of the verb. Okay, here's an example, hutas, not one of those personal pronouns that we went over, but it's what is called a demonstrative pronoun, this or that. Hutas in this case means this. And so hutas estin hahuias, this means this one, or this, is hahuias, the sun. Okay? The subject is going to be that pronoun. So this is the sun, not the sun is this one. Okay? This is the pronoun, so this is the sun. Second rule, the subject will be articular. Okay? In other words, it will have a definite article attached to it. In the next example sentence there, kurias estin hahuias tu anthropou kai tu sabatu. I'm sorry. Okay. In this case, the basic sentence, all those genitives are kind of stuck on there. The basic sentence is kurias estin hahuias. All right, which one is it? Okay, is it the Lord is the Son or the Son is the Lord? All right, well, according to this rule here, the subject is going to be the one with the article on it. Okay, so the one that we put first in English is going to be the Son. The Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. Okay, the Son is Lord is the basic sentence. Okay. The final rule here, the subject is going to be a proper name. Right. Who then is Apollos? Okay. Apollos is the subject there. The reason why this is kind of, why Apollos isn't first is because this is a question. Who then is Apollos? All right, so that is how to tell. Here are three rules of how to tell the subject, which one is the subject and which one is a predicate nominative. First of all, the subject will, if there's a pronoun, the subject will be the pronoun. Secondly, if there's a nominative that has an article and a nominative that does not have an article, the one with the article will be the subject. And the last one, the subject, will be the one that is the proper name. And those proper names are easy to tell. Not too many of them. They don't appear a lot, and they will always be capitalized. Like this one, Apollos, that is somebody's name. All right, so those are the rules of how to tell a subject from a predicate nominative. Now, What happens, we're going to throw another complication here, what happens if both the subject and the predicate nominative fulfill some of those conditions? All right. What happens if you have, for example, a nominative that is a pronoun and a nominative that has an article? Well, the pronoun has the highest priority to be the subject. Okay. If you have a pronoun and an articular noun, if you have a pronoun and a proper noun, the pronoun is still the subject. Pronoun is always going to be on the top of the list for being the subject. So in this sentence, notice, hutas estin ha huias tu theu. You have the pronoun in the nominative hutas, and you have the articular noun in the pronoun ha huias. Which one is the subject? Well, the pronoun has the priority. So when you translate the sentence, it is not the Son of God is this one. It is he, or this one, is the Son of God. Right? Pronoun is the top of the mountain or top of the pyramid for being the subject. Now, if both substantives either have articles or they have proper names, well, then they get equal priority. What does that mean? Okay, well, first of all, we can look at word order. All right. Normally, in Greek, word order doesn't matter, but if you have two of these things that are an absolutely equal footing, the subject is going to usually be the one that comes first. All right, unless the sentence clearly is, there's no way that you can translate the sentence with it making any sense, with it being the other way. The one that is first is normally going to be the subject. All right. The other possibility is that the sentence is simply a convertible proposition, and it does not matter which order you do it in. All right. In this case here, hapater hemon Abraham estin, it's probably a convertible proposition. Okay. I can't say that word right. I always say preposition. Yeah, a preposition is something completely different. Convertible proposition. Okay. Our father is Abraham. Does that mean something really different than Abraham is our father? I don't think so. They both mean about the same thing. All right, but if you really had to choose, go with hapater because it's first. Okay. So yeah, that's how you distinguish between those two. If you have two that meet those conditions from the previous slide, pronoun has the greatest priority. Substantives with articles and proper names, they're pretty much tied, and you can either break the tie by choosing the one that's first, or you can just say, you know what, this is a convertible proposition, let me get that word right, where it pretty much means the same thing either way. Alright, now I just spent 10 or 15 minutes talking about that. Now what does this all mean? Why is this important? Here are some examples of, some theologically important sentences that, it's important to get this right. Okay, 1 John 4:8, again, I think I went over this before, ha theos agape estin, okay, God is love. God's character means that, God's character or God's nature is only love. Okay, God is love. In him there is no darkness at all. Nothing except love. God can only act in love. But it's not saying that love is synonymous with God. Again, as C.S. Lewis wrote, you get love confused with God, and it can lead to all kinds of bad stuff, right? Patriotism, love of country. You think of all of the horrible things that have happened when people have confused love of country with God. Love, even like mother love, a love of mother for a child, you get that confused with the greatest thing, and you get, parents who are just totally stifling their kids out of, quote, love, so that is an example of bad things that can happen when you turn this around. John 1:1 is a good example. Ha logos ein proston theon, kai theos ein ha logos. Okay, the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It is important to get this right, okay? There are some sects within Christianity, I think Jehovah's Witnesses, which will translate this the opposite way, and they'll argue for it. God was the Word, okay? It's important to get it the correct way. Okay, we know that it's the Word was God because, again, Word is articular. It has the article on it, so therefore it gets priority as a subject. The word Jesus is of the same nature as God. This is what John is writing about. Okay, John is saying the word partakes of the same nature. Okay, the word shares the same divinity as God. However, John is not saying that Jesus, the word, encompasses all of what God is. Okay, you can't say God was the Word. In other words, yeah, God, the Word is like, everything that God was. Okay, Jesus does not encompass all of what God is, because John speaks of a separate God the Father and a separate Comforter, God the Holy Spirit. Okay? And yeah, we can get into a long discussion about the Trinity and what all that means. Okay, but yeah, in some way, God is separate from Jesus, even though Jesus partakes of the full nature of God. Okay, Jesus does not encompass all of what God is, because there's God the Father and God the Holy Spirit as well. All right, and there are some Christians who totally believe that the Trinity is not a thing. That's not a good way to do it, and it's not faithful to the Bible, but certainly John, the Gospel of John, writes in that sense. Okay. The last one here, John 20, verse 31. Tauta gegraptai hina pistus eta hata Jesus estin ha Christos. Okay. These things have been written in order that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ. Why is this important? Yeah. The actual thing that we're looking at is the very last bit of that. Jesus estin ha Christos. Okay, Jesus is the Christ. Why is that important? This answers the question, well, who was John writing to? And there have been a lot of debates in this in like Christian academics. Who is John writing to? Is John writing to a group of Gentiles? Or is John primarily writing to Jews? Okay, a Gentile audience would be asking the question, who is Jesus? We've just concluded this like long biography of this person, Jesus, and the Gentile audience would ask, who is Jesus? Like, why is this important that we know who this person Jesus is? Whereas a Jewish audience would be interested in who is the Messiah, right? The Jews have been waiting for a Messiah for all of these years. And if you're stating that the Messiah has come, they're going to be perking up and saying, well, who is this Messiah? Who is the Christ? So one way of answering this question, who is John writing to, or who is the Gospel of John primarily written for, is to answer this question, okay? Either who is Jesus or who is the Messiah. If you're going to put Jesus first, if Jesus is the subject, then you're answering the question, who is Jesus? Okay, who is Jesus? Well, Jesus is the Christ. That's why Jesus is important. All right. If you put the Christ first, the Messiah first, the Messiah is Jesus, then you're answering the second question. Okay, who is the Messiah? Well, the Messiah is Jesus. So, is there a way to tell grammatically? Well, I've noted here, Jesus is a proper name, and Christ in the Greek has the article with it, and so they get equal priority, but Jesus is first, so that gets the weight of the subject. Okay, that kind of has more gravity as the subject. Most likely the subject is Jesus is the Christ, therefore we can make the argument that John is writing primarily to Gentiles. And then you'd have to go through the entirety of John and take a look at the language and ask those questions of who is this being written to or for. But just with that one statement, it seems like the yeah, you have a bit of evidence that suggests maybe this is a Gentile audience. So some examples of why this is important. Now, the next few uses of the nominative are very limited, and you won't see them very often. This first one doesn't even concern a nominative, okay? But occasionally in the New Testament, instead of using a predicate nominative, okay, instead of using like a word in the nominative to play that role, they will substitute the prepositional phrase ace plus the accusative. Okay, but you don't translate it that way. If you remember from last year, ace plus the accusative means into or to or toward, okay, whatever the accusative is. But if you see this phrase used with certain verbs, do not translate it into something, but rather just translate it as a predicate nominative. Okay, what does that mean? Well, here's some examples. Okay, ha lithos, ha genomenos ace kephalein gonias. Okay, the stone has become the chief stone, or the headstone, not headstone like a cemetery headstone, but like the most important one. Okay, and in this case, yeah, ace kephalein, into the head. Well, that doesn't make any sense, okay? The stone that has become into the head cornerstone. That's clearly not what it means. In this case, just translate it like a predicate nominative. The stone has become the head or the main cornerstone. All right, second example here, essantai, that's a future form of to be, okay, will be. The two will become one flesh. All right, this is not, the two will become toward one flesh, into one flesh. Okay, that has some really disturbing connotations. Okay, this is referring to like when two people get married, and the two will become into one flesh. Okay, like one person is eating the other one. We don't want that to happen in a marriage ceremony. We're not like talking about black widow spiders or something like that here. So yeah, the two will become one flesh. They'll become like one flesh. Okay, but yeah, just translate it like a predicate nominative. No preposition here. Okay, just, yeah, that's what they will be. Normally, the underlined phrases there would be in the nominative case, but for some reason, certain New Testament authors use this phrase, and I don't know why. It doesn't make sense, but yeah, just be aware of that. Next one here, nominative apposition. I only included this because there are other instances of other cases with apposition, so it's important to know what this means. All right, apposition is two substantives, say two nouns or pronoun and noun or whatever. Okay, two substantives that they appear in the same case and they refer to the same person or thing. Okay, they also have the same relationship to the rest of the sentence or clause. They're going to be they're both going to be the subject, or however else, the predicate nominative in this case. Okay, it could be. Apposition is always referring to something that is seeking clarification or description or identification. What does practically look like? Okay, here you have the difference between a predicate nominative and the nominative apposition. Predicate nominative makes an assertion about the subject. Here is a sentence with a predicate nominative. Paul is an apostle. Okay, we are asserting that Paul is an apostle. The nominative apposition pretty much states those two things are exactly the same. And it is assuming something. It's attributing something. It's saying that this is Paul is this, but it's assuming this. Paul, the apostle. Okay, that's apposition. Those two words, Paul and apostle, are referring to the same thing. Here, in general, of course, Greek, you don't really want to say always. In general, the appositional noun is articular. Okay. John the Baptist. Mary, the Magdalene. we just say Mary Magdalene like that's her last name, but really that means Mary the Magdalene. In other words, somebody from Magdala. Okay. In the original Greek, or the original way of thinking, that's Mary the Magdalene. And yeah, it's a nominative apposition. It's saying John and the Baptist is the same thing. Mary and the Magdalene is the same thing. All right, that word there, apposition, will come in our description of our discussion of other cases, and so that's why I brought it up here, so you kind of know what that is. It means these two words are referring to the exact same thing, and it's making an assumption about the quality or the state of the noun. Okay, here we have a nominative absolute. This appears so infrequently that I wasn't even sure if I should include it, but this is a nominative that has no relation to the rest of the sentence or the clause. Okay, these are totally independent of anything, and here the nominative absolute is always used in either a title or a salutation or an address. Okay, a greeting, Paul, an apostle, to the church in Galatia. Okay, or here are the examples. There, a title. Okay, the revelation of Jesus Christ. This example that we were talking about in the first class period there. The revelation of Jesus Christ. This has nothing to do with any of the other sentences. It's just really the introduction or the title of the work. The Gospel of Mark. The title of it is actually not the Gospel of Mark. It's the beginning of the Gospel of Jesus Christ. Okay, Mark 1:1 gives the title, the beginning of the Gospel of Jesus Christ. Okay. That is another example of a nominative absolute. It does not have any bearing on any other part of the sentence. It's just pretty much laying it out there saying this is the title of the work. Also, the salutation. Okay, Paul likes to use these. Charis kai e rene apatheo Theu patros hemon kai kuriou Jesu. Grace and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. Okay, it's a greeting. It's nothing else. It doesn't tie into anything else. Okay. I said, notice this example is quite long. It's not like the revelation of Jesus Christ. Yeah, boom, that's like really nice and short and tidy. This one's, it's a little bit longer, but it still is, it's not a complete sentence. Okay, so therefore is a nominative absolute, as contrasted with the next category. Okay, the pendent nominative. It's pretty much the exact same as the nominative absolute, but the difference is that it is used in a sentence. Okay, it's part of a sentence. The nominative absolute is always standing off by itself. It doesn't have anything to do with like any other sentence or part of the paragraph. The pendent nominative is part of a sentence, and it usually has emphasis or expresses like some kind of deep emotion. If it is emphasis, it can be translated with reference to. Okay, here's a good example, Revelation 3, verse 12. Ha nikon, the one who overcomes or the one who is victorious, poieso auton stulon. Okay, I will make him a pillar. It's one of those weird statements in Revelation. Okay, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and he will never leave it. Some people are going, oh, I don't know if I want to be one of these overcomers. In the context of Revelation, it's a good thing. Okay, but the one who overcomes, I will make him a pillar. Now, the actual sentence is after the comma. Okay, the actual sentence is, I will make him a pillar. That ha nikon, it's kind of off by itself. Therefore, it's the pendent nominative. Notice that it cannot be the subject of poieso. Okay, poieso is first person singular. I will make. You can't have a third person ha nikon in there. Okay, if ha nikon is the one who's doing the doing, then poieso has to be third person singular, not first person singular. Okay, so it's a pendent nominative. It's kind of restating this. It's actually a restatement of the auton. Okay, it's telling you who the auton is. I will make him a pillar. Who's the him? It's the one who overcomes. Okay, you can think of it with reference to. supply that phrase there. With reference to the one who overcomes, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. Okay, yeah. These don't appear a lot. I think most of the uses actually are in Revelation chapters 2 and 3, where it just repeats this kind of phrase, or pattern there. To the one who overcomes, I will do this. I will grant them something. I will, give them something good. Okay, this is a reward. Yeah. Now this one is, I almost didn't include this, okay, but it's in your textbook. So the nominative of address, or sometimes it's called the nominative as vocative or for vocative. The vocative case is the actual case of direct address, okay, but the nominative, it looks a lot like the vocative, and so we think that in some cases the authors just use the nominative instead of the vocative because they look so similar. Most of the time with the plurals, the plural vocative is identical to the nominative. Okay? But this usage is, it's pretty obvious. Okay? Is a person being addressed directly? Am I talking directly, students, study your lesson. Okay, I'm addressing students. Or am I naming students as a subject? Students who study are going to do well. Okay. The distinction between those two is very obvious. So this is not difficult. And there's something that makes it even easier a lot of times, but the first example here, Matthew 16, verse 17, Makarios A, Simon Bar-Yona. Okay, Simon is the nominative there. It's somebody's name. Okay, blessed are you. That's a statement. You are blessed. But now we're turning from talking about something to now directly addressing the person. Okay, blessed are you. I'm addressing you now directly, Simon, son of John. Okay, pretty obvious of that. We're not saying that Simon is doing something. It's saying that you are blessed, and now we're talking directly to you. What makes this super obvious is when it's used with the particle O. It's just an omega with a smooth breathing mark. Okay, and it is literally translated O. It's like, oh, what? Oh man, he has shown you, oh man, what is good. Okay, this O is kind of like a really formal way of addressing somebody. And if you see this, yeah, you're dealing with a nominative being used like a vocative. Okay, so if you see O with a nominative, no, that's not a nominative. It's not the subject of anything. We're actually just talking directly to somebody. Galatians 3, verse 1, kind of Paul's spicy letter here that he gets really emotional and really upset. O anoetoi Galatai, tis humas ebaskaken. O foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? Okay. Talking directly to the Galatians. It doesn't really have anything to do with the rest of the sentence. It's just saying who we're addressing when we say this thing. All right, so that is the end of Chapter 1, the nominative. So have a look at that once you get your textbooks and start looking into reviewing for the stuff that we had in our first quarter. You've heard me talking long enough, so have a good rest of your week, and I'll be getting some of that material to you so you can refer to this lecture as you do those.